Hello and welcome to Monday's edition of Channel 51 Independent News that you may be watching here on Channel 51. You could be watching it on Cafe Lockdown or listening in on WRMI Radio, the one and only news bulletin, independent, coming out of Australia, going around the world. Now, there's a lot to get through in today's bulletin, and we'll get through those headlines for you right now. Europe's leaders are raising pressure on Donald Trump to involve Ukraine in Putin's peace talks in Alaska later in the week. Economists in Australia are once again favouring a rate cut at the RBA meeting tomorrow. The Productivity Commission calls for user charges on electric vehicles. Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel controlling Gaza is the only way forward despite a backlash. And Trump vows to take back Washington, D.C., relocate the homeless immediately. Meanwhile, the US House Oversight Committee is now looking at the Biden cognitive testing story to see where that's going to head. Counter-terrorism and special ops have been deployed to protect Ghislaine Maxwell. J.D. Vance says indictments are needed in the Russiagate case to prevent it from ever happening again. Dr. William Macus is facing a personal ban and also one on ivermectin in his home state of province of Alberta in Canada. RFK Jr. is questioning the economics of vaccine medicine, obscuring doctors' duties. And a Japanese jab study finds 600 deaths among 25 million recipients and counting. Well, Europe's leaders are raising pressure on Donald Trump to involve Ukraine in Putin talks to be held in Alaska commencing later this month. Let's go to this report. Europe's leaders have raised the pressure on Donald Trump to involve Ukraine in a planned summit with Vladimir Putin as Germany warned the White House against any deal hatched over the heads of Europeans and Ukrainians. Speaking before a bilateral meeting expected to take place between the United States and Russian leaders this Friday in Alaska, the German Chancellor Merz said he hoped and assumed that the Ukraine's President Zelensky would also be involved. Merz told the broadcaster ARD that Berlin was working closely with Washington to try to ensure Zelensky's attendance at the talks. We cannot accept in any case that territorial questions are discussed or even decided between Russia and America over the heads of Europeans and Ukrainians, he said. I assume that the American government sees it the same way. The Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, said the summit would be about testing Putin on how serious he was about bringing this terrible war to an end. Meanwhile, Trump has said ending the war would involve some swapping of territories to the betterment of both, meaning Ukraine could be required to renounce significant parts of its territory. Zelensky on Saturday stressed that Ukrainians would not give up their land to occupiers. A European official confirmed a counter-proposal was put forward by European representatives at the Chevening meeting but declined to provide details. In pointed remarks, Mark Rutte added it will be, of course, about security guarantees, but also about the absolute need to acknowledge that Ukraine decides on its own future, that Ukraine has to be a sovereign nation deciding its own geopolitical outcomes. Announcing there would be an emergency meeting of EU ministers for Monday, Brussels top diplomat Kaja Kallas echoed that sentiment. President Trump is right that Russia has to end its war against Ukraine. The US has the power to force Russia to negotiate seriously, and any deal between the US and Russia must have Ukraine and the EU included, for it is a matter of Ukraine's and the whole of Europe's security, Kallas said. Meanwhile, Benjamin Netanyahu has defended his Gaza City plan as the UN warns of calamity and starvation. Benjamin Netanyahu has defended his plan to take over the Gaza City in face of widespread international outrage, even as senior UN officials warned that the move risked unleashing another calamity on a territory already experiencing starvation, pure and simple. In a rare press conference with foreign journalists in Jerusalem, the Israeli PM said the plan, signed off last week by the Security Cabinet to criticism both at home and abroad, was the best way to end the war and the best way to end it speedily. But during an emergency weekend session of the UN Security Council in New York, there were repeated warnings that rather than end the 22-month war, the move would exacerbate an already dire humanitarian situation. If these plans are implemented, they will likely trigger another calamity in Gaza, reverberating across the region and causing further forced displacement, killings and destruction, said UN Assistant Secretary General Miroslav Jenka. Well, in Australia, we are hanging on for a decision tomorrow, one would hope, from the Reserve Bank on a cut in interest rates, with experts convinced the RBA will cut interest rates despite the bank shrugging off similar peer pressure in July. What we've learnt is that economists and financial markets are convinced the RBA will drop the cash rate from 3.85% to 3.6% after the central bank stared down a similar consensus about 6 weeks ago. Australians are spending more but buying less than in 2022, underlying the intense cost of living pressures on households ahead of the meeting. The majority of board members, 9 of 12, voted against a cut last time, and this time we're hoping to see perhaps a different result because inflation has now sunk to as low as 2.1%, which is at the bottom of the bank's 2 to 3% range. And RBA officials, using their other underlying measure of price growth, also that fell to 2.7%, well within the range there. Given these developments, the chief economist of Deutsche Bank, Phil O'Donoghue, said that he expected that Monetary Policy Board's decision Tuesday would be a unanimous decision in favour of a rate cut. If the majority of banks were to pass on the cut in full, which they should do, there should be at least 30 lenders offering at least one variable rate under 5.25%, while the CBA and Westpac's lowest rates could hit 5.34%, said Sally Tyndall from the website CanStar. And there's been 18 banks that have already dropped their fixed rates below 5%, and I thought it was worthwhile putting these up on the screen for you. So starting there from BOQ, the Greater Bank there, offering 4.89% and 4.9% for as long as 3 years, in fact, which certainly becomes tempting for those people perhaps considering locking in for some form of certainty if they're at the bottom of the rate cycle. And you can see other banks that have been listed there, including Macquarie Bank, Police Bank. You've even got Members Equity Bank there, Police Credit Union, Summerland Bank, even the Bank of China, and some offering a 4.99% fixed for 1 year, which could be quite handy for some people expecting that they might catch it on the way down again next year when that was to expire. So much is going on. Meanwhile, the Productivity Commission, well, they've suggested that there should be calls for changes to road user charges to fund road upgrades. The Productivity Commission has called for changes on road user charges for all drivers as a way to fund road and infrastructure upgrades. Let's go to this report. The federal body tasked with boosting Australian living standards has reissued calls for a national road user charge to help fund major infrastructure projects, which would also force drivers of electric vehicles to contribute to road maintenance. As it stands, EV drivers are not subject to the 51.6 cents per litre fuel excise drivers ultimately pay when refuelling at the Bowser. The call to arms was detailed in the Productivity Commission's analysis of the national competition policy, the fourth of 5 reports handed to Jim Chalmers ahead of the Economic Reform Roundtable later this month. This follows long-term calls by the PC to enact a road user charge on all vehicle types, with a current charge only applied to heavy vehicles through a diesel excise. Road infrastructure should be funded through our user charges that reflect the efficient cost of providing and maintaining that infrastructure, the report said. By giving drivers a clear signal about the cost of infrastructure, they would have an incentive to use it more efficiently. Moreover, there will be a signal to infrastructure providers where changes in road capacity are warranted. Now, if you are watching or listening to Channel 51 News via Cafe Locked Out or perhaps on WRMI Radio, you can also choose to subscribe at channel51.com.au with an introductory offer to help support independent media, where we have dropped the annual plan fee of $75 down to just $51 to celebrate the launch of the new channel, and that would equate to an annual plan support of around 98 cents a week. And for that contribution, you will get access to an independent news bulletin Monday to Friday, each day of the week, running approximately 30 minutes. And you'll also get access to a number of specialised interviews, depending on particular topics that could cover all aspects of news and the political spectrum from Australia and the United States, and of course around the world, as we continue to dig deep and look forward to what may be coming in the new world, and also at the same time providing detailed analysis and questioning all of those parts of the news cycle that concern us in great detail, as we obviously try and chronicle what is going on in independent news. And I thank you all for your support report. It certainly makes a big difference as we look to upgrade and professionalise independent media to be every bit as good as what's being served up to us in the mainstream. Well, continuing now, and we move over to the United States, and we've learnt now that Donald Trump has vowed to push homeless people out of DC, jail criminals, and saying we want our capital back. He said that he vows to immediately force the homeless people out of DC to place far away. Now, what he's also said is he's going to make our capital safer and more beautiful than it ever was before. He wrote that on his Truth Social account, Local Times Sunday. We want our capital back. The homeless must move out immediately. We will give you places to stay, but far away from the capital. He added that any criminals roaming through the streets of DC need not worry about finding a new home. The criminals, you don't have to move out. We're going to put you in jail where you belong. It's all going to happen very fast, just like the border. He said this will be easier. Be prepared. There will be no more Mr. Nice Guy. And to put that information there on the screen for you, he says we're having a news conference tomorrow in the White House. I'm going to make our capital safer and more beautiful than it ever was before. And then somebody has matched it up to this particular post from the Q post very early on. Think about it logically. The only way is the military, fully controlled, save and spread. And then goes on to say, maybe one day, but it cannot go slow. The initial wave will be fast and meaningful. It will send a signal to others that I am immediately, and you will see the tide turn. Not even the mainstream media can hide. And rest assured, some people will be jailed as deep cover agents. Well, let's go back and have a look at what Trump said just last week.
What a shame. The rate of crime, the rate of muggings, killings, and everything else, we're not going to let it. And that includes bringing in the National Guard, maybe very quickly, too.
There you go, the National Guard being brought into DC to protect the nation's capital in relation to a crime wave that continues to go on there. Well, meanwhile, another criminal in jail for 20 years, Ghislaine Maxwell, who'd been moved to a Texas prison. Well, it's now been reported that counterterrorism and special op forces have been deployed to protect her whilst being sentenced to life in that Texas prison. Maxwell, a convicted sex trafficker and accomplice to Jeffrey Epstein, should be safe from any potential threats against her life. The New York Sun has revealed that special ops and counterterrorism forces have been deployed to her facility in Texas after she received a barrage of death threats. The report states Epstein's longtime paramour and closest associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, has received death threats since her surprise transfer to a minimum security prison camp at Byron, Texas, prompting federal corrections officials to call in the Bureau of Prisons Counterterrorism and Special Operations units to considerably beef up its security at the facility. There's been death threats received. A source close to the investigation tells The Sun they are focused on the outside looking in as opposed to the happenings inside the camp. Well, we've also now learned that Vice President J.D. Vance has addressed the explosive new revelations of the Russian collusion hoax origins. I don't know how anybody can look at that and say that they weren't aggressive violations of the law. We've got to have consequences, he said. Let's cut to that clip right now where he's speaking to Maria Bartiromo at Fox.
I absolutely want to see indictments, Maria. Look, of course, you've got to have the law follow the facts here. You don't just indict people to indict people. You indict people because they broke the law. But if you look at what Tulsi and Kash Patel have revealed in the last couple of weeks, I don't know how anybody can look at that and say that there wasn't aggressive violations of the law. What they basically did is they defrauded the American people in order to take Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign talking points and turn them into intelligence by defrauding the American people, defrauding the intelligence agencies, lying about what the intel said. They would take something that supported a Hillary Clinton campaign talking point and they would overemphasize it and exaggerate it. They took anything that actually contradicted that narrative and they buried it deep. And through that, they actually laundered Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign talking points through the American intelligence services. That's a violation of the people's trust. That's a violation of what our intelligence services should be doing, and I absolutely think they broke the law. You're going to see a lot of people get indicted for that. Here's the thing that should really bother the American people. What do you want our intelligence community to be doing? I want them to be catching bad guys. I want them to be making sure that terrorists aren't going to kill innocent American civilians. I don't want them laundering Hillary Clinton's campaign talking points into the American media and giving them this air of legitimacy. It is sick. And it's disgusting. It hurt the intelligence community, it hurt the American people, and it hurt the first Trump administration. We've got to have consequences for it, or we're just going to see the same play repeated again and after.
Well, they're certainly laying the groundwork for arrests to happen in DC. And of course, with the attack on the Doge worker, known as affectionately as Big Balls, being another reason to prompt Trump to say that he's going to federalize and bring in the National Guard for protection. One wonders how this is all going to play out. The timing is just exquisite. Meanwhile, James Comer of the House Oversight Committee, appearing on Just the News with John Solomon, says that he wants to gather evidence that could overturn Biden's pardons and executive orders. And Donald Trump has shared that on his Truth Social. This is great news, says President Donald John Trump. Let's play part of that interview for you now.
Most damning thing you've learned in the course of these interviews and document gathering so far?
Well, the fact that they didn't think it was important to do a cognitive test. I mean, that shows they knew what was going on. You know, the testimony from the last few who we've deposed have said, well, Dr. O'Connor didn't think a cognitive test amounted to anything, even though everyone in the media has said that President Trump should take a cognitive test.
That's
you know
right.
what I mean? It's always when it's left up to the media, the rules only apply to Republicans.
That's
the
right.
American people saw that Joe Biden was in decline. Robert Hur stated it early on, even before the disastrous debate, when he conducted his interview with Joe Biden, and Joe Biden couldn't even remember the dates that he served as vice president of the United States, that something was wrong with Joe Biden. This inner circle shielded Joe Biden from everyone, not just the majority of his staff, but the media and the American people. And they wouldn't even allow a cognitive test to be applied to Joe Biden because they feared what the outcome of that cognitive test would be. So I think that's pretty damning, John.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that came from Bruce Reed, if I remember that correctly, and the doctor. The fact that they were talking about it must have meant that they had some concerns about what they saw with the president, right?
Right. And the media, even liberal media outlets, were questioning whether or not Joe Biden should take a cognitive test or whether or not Joe Biden had taken a cognitive test. So, you know, when NBC and MSNBC and CNN are questioning your cognitive ability, and the 3 or 4 staffers around Joe Biden said, oh, no, we don't need to take a cognitive test, I think that's pretty damning evidence that they knew something bad was wrong with the president of the United States.
Yeah.
It's extraordinary, isn't it, when you think that the pressure has been on President Trump and second guessing him, but the same people, when asked about Joe Biden, well, they just deflect and look the other way. But we're all very used to seeing how that goes on. Now, in Australia now, we've learned that there will be a sizable rally, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, Adelaide and Canberra, taking place on the 31st of August 2025 from noon. It's called Australia, It's Time to Rise. The event locations will be released on the 15th of August. The event is about protecting our culture, our heritage, our way of life, and wanting to put an end to mass immigration. Australia first, no foreign flags allowed. This is a 100% organic and grassroots movement, and it will stay this way because it is grassroots. We need people power. Everyone needs to be constantly sharing and helping spread the word. The organisers, who remain anonymous, say, please follow whichever account this image is posted from to stay up to date, or ask for a link to where they found it. This event is peaceful and is not intended to incite any hate or violence, but the point there being protecting Aussie culture, history and heritage and our way of life, and obviously the point there, ending mass immigration, being the focus. And we'll see how that is reacted upon in the mainstream, and whether it can get the same coverage that the Palestinian protests over the Sydney Harbour Bridge were able to achieve last weekend. It certainly makes a difference when the mainstream media wants to cover it, and the general public can start to weigh in on the rallies and the protests and understand what people are actually on about, because it's all about them. This is about the Australia that we want for ourselves, and not the one that's being taken over without any sort of consultation by our Prime Minister. Meanwhile, heading over to Canada now, and Dr. William Makis is facing, an injunction enjoining the respondent from offering or providing any health services to the public and from using titles and abbreviation protected under the Health Professions Act. That's what's happened, where Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith's efforts to criminalise ivermectin in Alberta. Now, Dr. Mackus has set up a Give, Send, Go legal fund, and it's hit a new record, raising $267,000 to date. And you can support him at givesendgo.com/Mackus. MD. He says, thanks to everyone for your support from around the world. The Alberta Canada Danielle Smith is rushing to court with this attack on ivermectin before Albertans wake up to what's going on. And they're insisting on August the 15th. The vast majority of Albertans don't realise that the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta is grossly overstepping their boundaries as set by provincial law. They're trying to destroy my ivermectin cancer clinic, but health coaching is not regulated in Canada, and the College of Physicians has absolutely no legal authority to attack and no legal jurisdictions over it. However, if they succeed, they will have the ability to target anyone using ivermectin, and no Alberta healthcare professional will ever provide any help to any patient with ivermectin again. They will come after nurses, pharmacists, naturopaths, and every kind of health coach and health practitioner. In this way, when they shut down the use of ivermectin across the entire province, effectively criminalising it, doctors will attack and drop their patients, says Dr. Mackus. If they find out they're using ivermectin, this chilling effect cannot be understated. It could lead to thousands of deaths. And he also writes, Mackus says, flood Danielle Smith's office with phone calls on 780-427-2251, or flood CPSA Registrar Scott McLeod's office with phone calls as well, he said as he wrote this on Monday. Well, it's all happening, isn't it, when you look at the stories about health and vaccines, etc. And what we learned last week with Bobby Kennedy cancelling the development of 22 different mRNA vaccines, saving almost $500 million in development costs. Well, combat correspondent Michael Yon has delivered a bone-chilling warning where a Japanese science team led by Dr. Yasufumi Murakami has poured through 25 million vaccination records and believes at least 600,000 people were lost to COVID jabs.
The science team is led up by our mutual friend, Dr. Yasufumi Murakami. He's an expert on this, and he's been pulling together the key people in Japan. And now they have up to about 25 million records. A week or so ago, it was 21 million that they had that they were talking about. But now that they're satisfied with the most latest records they've released, it's about 25 million records. And the deaths in Japan are at least 600,000, they believe, that they know about. And it's clearly getting worse. And so it's quite severe. It makes me wonder, of course, what the numbers are like across the United States and in Europe. Dr. Murakami, he's living this night and day, with his team. There's a lot of volunteers. I think it's about 350 volunteers who have been helping assemble the data.
That's about 4%.
It's pretty intense.
I mean, that's a big number.
It is. Yeah. Of course, the Japanese are still going down that direction of more jabs. Not all of them, but, they're like we are, except even more intensely jabbed than we are. And last year, Dr. Murakami and Masako and I, we drove up to Fukushima, which is in a different part of Japan. A lot of people know Fukushima from the tsunami and the nuclear
reactor
plant there. And but so they've actually built a jab plant there. I mean, this thing's unbelievable. We went to it and published footage from it. And this thing is what's it called? Arcturus, I think it was the name. We were right there. We were right at the front gate. And again, I published it. It's on my Substack. But they were building another what they call replicons, what Dr. Murakami calls replicons. These are the ones that will replicate, right? Like right out of the movie. And so if somebody else gets the jab, they would spread to unjabbed people.
Quite extraordinary what we're learning out of Japan. Meanwhile, after Bobby Kennedy was out last week, pulling the pin on those 22 mRNA vaccines in development, he's come out again talking about incentives paid to doctors and the distraction that causes. Very important as Bobby Kennedy is trying to refocus and re-aim and, of course, take out the financial incentives of Big Pharma along the way. Let's take a listen.
Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr., your HHS secretary. Let me ask you something. Should doctors make decisions based upon what's best for their patients or based upon what makes them the most money? It's not a tough question, but we've inherited a healthcare system that constantly pushes doctors toward the latter. It rewards certain treatments not because they're better for the patient, but because someone profits. Take what happened during COVID. Hospitals were paid to report staff vaccination rates. Those numbers were fed into the National Healthcare Safety Network, then published on the CDC website to shame any hospital that refused to become an enforcer of federal vaccine mandates. Today, I'm proud to announce we've eliminated that policy by repealing a dangerous Biden-era provision in the CMS inpatient payment rule. And we're not stopping there. We're scanning every corner of the healthcare system for hidden incentives that corrupt medical judgment. What we're finding is alarming. Doctors are being paid to vaccinate, not to evaluate. They're pressured to follow the money, not the science. We've recently uncovered that more than 36,000 doctors had their Medicare reimbursements altered based upon childhood vaccination rates. That's not medicine. That's coercion. It's immoral. It has no place in a constitutional democracy or in a system that claims to protect children. Medical decisions should be made based upon one thing and one thing only: the well-being of the patient, never on a financial bonus or a government mandate. Patients deserve honest, uncorrupted advice from their doctors. Doctors deserve the freedom to use their training and to follow the science and speak the truth without fear of punishment. Doctors should be guided by medical judgment and their Hippocratic oath, not by financial incentives or government mandates. That's what this policy change is about, and it's just the beginning. Thank you very much.
Well, the Bobby Kennedy certainly changing the focus of how doctors will look after their patients in the future. And in the story earlier in the bulletin about the EV charges through the Productivity Commission, we now learn through some breaking news that the plans have been fast-tracked for a new road user charge for EV drivers. And the first out of the blocks is reported to be the New South Wales government looking to add a charge of between $300 and $400 a year for electric vehicle drivers. This is because they don't pay the 51.6 cents a litre excise duty paid on fuel. The government, therefore, realising that, well, whilst you might not be polluting, even though when you charge you're using coal-fired power, well, now it's bad luck anyway. You're going to have to cough up $300 to $400 a year, likely on your local New South Wales registration. And you can count on the fact that with a majority of state governments being Labor and a Labor federal government, that will flow through very quickly. So the big taxing governments, the Labor governments that have been told by Treasury that they have to increase their taxes and lower their services, well, they will most certainly oblige. And we're going to see in the Productivity Economic Summit coming up August 19th, an array of different charges there, such as reducing the capital gains tax discount, also increasing taxes on super, lowering of the thresholds, with the Greens trying to get $3 million down to $2 million. And one of the Teals even proposing to increase the GST from 10 to 15%. The flavour of communism is well and truly alive in Australia. Those lefties certainly working out ways to take your money because they can spend it better than you. Meanwhile, we've been told our whole lives that the opposite holds. So how will consider what's going on there in the world of politics, and what will your decisions be? Thank you for watching this news edition for Monday, August the 11th. I'll be back tomorrow with another bulletin and a series of interviews that I will bring to you over the coming weeks that will be covering a range of topics from Australia and around the world. Thanks, everyone. See you all on the next show.